The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last Monday, we had a little bit of an initial conversation about the World Cup. We've had a bunch more games now, so I thought I would do a little update. How's the U.S. team doing? How are the teams I'm rooting for doing? As I mentioned last week, I'm rooting for Argentina, Uruguay, and Mexico in that order. As of right now, Argentina has qualified for the second round after 2 games. They're really not playing that well. They defeated Bosnia-Herzegovina 2-1. They defeated Iran over the weekend, but it was a 1-0 victory with a goal in stoppage time after really not playing very well against Iran, a team that they should have been able to pretty easily handle. So there's one of 2 ways this could go with Argentina, Lewis. Number one, they just lose once they get into the second round because they're not playing that well. Number 2, which sometimes can happen, is they just play slightly better than whoever their opponent is, right? And once they have stronger opponents, they start to play better. But that, to me, that's a pretty risky way to play. I mean, I think you should... What happened with Netherlands in the first game, where they had the 5 goals, they were playing way better than their opponent. And I think that's a much stronger strategy than just being slightly better in each game.
Right. I mean, every game is still so important, and
Yeah.
if they can't perform like World Cup winners every game, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So we'll see who they end up playing against. They still have a third game in the group play. Uruguay is right now 1-1. They won a game. They lost a game. They're playing Italy tomorrow. That's a huge game. If Uruguay wins tomorrow against Italy, I believe that they're in. That's going to be a difficult game, so that's what's going on there. Mexico has a win and a draw. If they defeat Croatia later today, they are in. The U.S. won their first game against Ghana. They went down 1-0 against Portugal yesterday. Within something like 5 or 6 minutes, Portugal scored a goal. It looked like Portugal was in control during the first half, and in the second half, very quickly, the U.S. got 2 goals, went ahead 2-1. And then in stoppage time, I think in the 95th minute, this was probably the latest goal in any World Cup game this year, Portugal scoring on a pretty good header setup from I don't know, not midfield, but definitely a good setup, and ended up tying. Did you see that, Lewis?
I saw it. I was very disappointed. Of course, now that means we need to beat or tie Germany in order to advance.
And I think there's like some scenario I thought I read where the U.S. could lose against Germany, but still go ahead on like a tiebreaker situation. But it's a very complex thing with different goal scoring scenarios. Long story short, if the U.S. does not at least tie Germany, which will be very difficult, it's very unlikely that the U.S. will move on to the second round. But they have not been eliminated, which is definitely something.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly better than a loss, but considering we should have won the game, it was kind of a bummer.
Protests continuing in Brazil, and there was an interesting banner that Dave Zirin from The Nation posted, which was a protest banner which said, "It's not against soccer, it's against repression, evictions, deaths, and embezzlement." And I think that it was really important to see that, Lewis, because so often when we talk about the World Cup and Olympics and the humanitarian situation, the plutocratic pro-business situation, the conversation often turns to, should we be getting rid of the sporting event altogether? And as Dave Zirin told us, and as we're seeing from so many Brazilians, this isn't about being against the World Cup per se. This is about fixing all of the terrible stuff that comes with these multinational sporting events. And I think that the Brazilian protests are being very specific about the fact that they're not against the World Cup or soccer. And we don't always get that with these types of protests.
Right. Unfortunately, I think part of the protest means being against FIFA, being against that organization.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a difficult thing to change.
We've talked quite a bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. This is the so-called trade deal involving a dozen or so countries, and it is a hugely pro-corporate piece of legislation or agreement. It is being negotiated in great part in secret. President Obama has asked for it to be fast-tracked, which would prevent Congress and really the American people from having any say or input into TPP. It would create very strong intellectual property protections, which would be very, very good for big businesses. It would also have relatively weak environmental regulations, which would be very, very good for big businesses and their bottom lines, but would allow the destruction of our environment. That has been an absolute disaster. And now we have heard from WikiLeaks that there is yet another kind of trade type deal that is happening, which would be terrible for Americans. This is called, it's specifically the Financial Services Annex of TISA, the Trade in Services Agreement. And there are these negotiations going on, which would help bypass efforts by governments to rein in large corporations by pushing through it's called a trade agreement. If you hear me hesitating to use that term, it's because it's not so much a trade agreement. It's really just a pro-business umbrella type of legislation. That is what's being proposed here. And this would be hugely advantageous for big corporations. And it would basically say, no matter what governments do, we're going to resist government authority to impose these regulations on us. And what's amazing about this, I don't know that everybody is seeing it this way, Lewis, but if you think about the sovereign citizen movement, if you think about the extreme small government, libertarian, anarcho-libertarian type conservatives, right? If you look at their ideology saying, the government does not have authority over me, the government is not a legitimate source of law or policy, these corporations are essentially arguing the same thing, but at the corporate level. It's the same type of anarcho-libertarian type ideology that says, you know what, we decide what we allow the government to tell us to do. The governments don't decide. And I haven't really heard too many in the media making this connection.
No, in a way, the sovereign citizens really are trying to emulate really rich guys, because really rich guys are the ones who actually can say, well, no, this law isn't going to apply to me anymore because I'm going to pay to make sure that it doesn't. Yeah,
the individual gun-toting sovereign citizens are trying to do what the plutocratic rich guys are doing, which is, hey, taxes for my big company? No, 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 no. We're going to rewrite the law. That doesn't apply to me. The opt-out mentality. And as WikiLeaks sums it up, despite the failures in the financial regulation evident during the 2007-08 global financial crisis and calls for improvement of relevant regulatory structures, proponents of TISA aim to further deregulate global financial services markets. We have broken systems that we started to just fix ever so slightly, right? We started to put little pieces of Scotch tape on a car that's falling apart as it goes down the highway, doing the slightest fixes. And now we have this, which would undo all of those fixes and be even more disastrous. This is a huge deal, the same way that corporate media never really talked about TPP and continues not to talk about it. They're really not talking about this either. And you know, there's two sides to this, Lewis. On the one hand, we know that large corporate media interests are controlled by lots of the corporations that want to see this type of legislation go through. So that's one part of it. At the same time, we have the component that it's not that easy to concisely sum up TPP and TISA, and it doesn't really make for that exciting of a story. And I think that's also a part of why we're not seeing corporate media coverage of it.
It's a lose-lose for corporate media. So what's the point? I understand them not wanting to bother. And as far as the administration goes and those organizing this, it's being talked about in secret for a reason, because it would outrage everyone who knew about it.
Almost everyone. We still have a small contingent which believes, and maybe it's not that small, that businesses can regulate themselves. All businesses have internal and obvious rational incentives to make sure that they never do anything that's bad for the environment or for their customers or for Americans or for the stock market or whatever the case may be. Of course, time and time again, we know that that's proven wrong, Lewis, but there is still that small contingent which says governments shouldn't regulate business. Business should regulate business.
And that small group of people are probably, well, most likely the ones involved with the businesses we're talking about here.
Okay, what is going on with Benghazi? Benghazi has become a complete and utter embarrassment for Republicans. We talked about the Benghazi scandal, so-called Benghazi scandal, which now is one incident similar to 12 or 13 that happened under George W. Bush, that nobody cared about then, perpetrated in part by a Guantanamo Bay detainee that George W. Bush released, and according to one of the alleged ringleaders, which has now been caught, was at least partially connected with that anti-Muslim video that was supposedly, according to the right-wingers, part of the big conspiracy cover-up that President Obama was involved in. Every time we get more information about the truth regarding Benghazi, we see that the Obama administration really was not involved in any conspiracy. There was no stand-down order. There were no coordinated talking points that were deliberately deceptive. There was absolutely none of it. But what we do get are more and more questions about why didn't anyone care when 13 Benghazis happened under George W. Bush. No one cared. And in spite of all the other evidence, that to me is still the most transparently corrupt, double standard, hypocritical aspect of the entire Benghazi so-called scandal.
Yeah. And I think if you talk to people, they kind of view Bush as this ultra aggressive security, defense, military madman. And so that they wouldn't make that connection. If these things happened under Bush, they were probably unavoidable, I guess you could say.
Yeah, they happened because people hated the freedom that George W. Bush provided to Americans and to everybody around the world. So it was that's why they happened under George W. Bush. You can't blame Bush, you know? I mean, it's obviously with Obama, he's a socialist, communist, Indonesian, Kenyan, Muslim, whatever, and that's obviously why. Rand Paul is sticking with it. Rand Paul doesn't care about all the evidence we now have. He was recently on NBC's Meet the Press. He refused to criticize President Obama on Iraq for now, but he went after Hillary on Benghazi, saying Hillary will have to answer for her actions or lack thereof leading up to the Benghazi terrorist incident. What's he talking about? I mean, what is Rand Paul talking about at this point?
I don't know. I guess he just has to, start attacking Hillary in advance of the election. Is he going to be running again? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. And I just don't get. Will they ever just admit, you know what? We were right. We said nothing during the 13 Benghazis under Bush, and we were wrong. Every single one of our ideas about what the cover-up was, what the conspiracy was, they were all wrong, and we're sorry. We take it all back. We apologize. I wouldn't hold my breath for that. Very interesting new study about the correlation between gun safety regulation and the number of guns in a state and the number of gun homicides in that state. There is now a new study from the Violence Policy Center using data from the CDC. This is very, very interesting. This is causing gun nuts, the more guns in more places, no matter what, folks, often NRA members, to go absolutely bonkers, Lewis. Listen to what we have here. States that have the most relaxed gun safety regulations and a higher number of guns have more gun deaths. States that have more strict gun safety regulations and fewer guns have fewer gun deaths, which goes directly in the face of this idea, an obviously false notion, that the more guns we have and the more accessible that guns are, the safer everybody will be. Now, let me be clear. Even in the states with the smaller number of gun deaths, the ratio per population of gun deaths is still exponentially higher than in most other developed countries. So, Lewis, while we'll get into the data, let's not forget that even the states that are doing better in the United States still are falling miserably behind what's happening in other countries.
Oh, it's still a total disaster. And not just the sheer number of gun deaths, the per capita gun deaths is it's a total disaster.
The 5 states with the highest per capita gun death rates in 2011, and the reason the numbers are from 2011 are these are the most recent numbers that we have, were Louisiana, Mississippi, Alaska, Wyoming, and Montana. All states that have extremely relaxed gun violence prevention laws, and they have higher gun ownership rates. The states with the lowest gun death rates in the country, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. Each of these states have stronger gun safety regulations as well as lower rates of gun ownership. I just don't know what else to say. You know, the reactions to this will be, well, If you look within the states, you'll see that most of the violence is within areas that have more gun regulation, and the parts of the state, blah, blah, this completely ignores the fact that within states, even across states, right? We've talked about the Chicago thing with Wisconsin and Indiana having very relaxed gun laws, but within a state, you're not even transporting the guns across state lines. There's nothing that stops you from just going out of your city and getting a gun. And Lewis, when will something be done about this? Because it seems the more data we have like this, the more the gun nuts push for having even more guns.
They will. Well, I'm sure we'll have stricter gun laws in some states, and I don't think we're going to regress at all in this area. But I see this being a very big problem for a very long time in this country.
And I will agree with those who say not every country that has a lot of guns has the same level of gun homicides that the U.S. does. I agree. The problem is Americans with this gun culture where the police can't be relied on, the government is oppressive, it's a very dangerous world out there. That entire meme is why Americans are having this problem with gun violence. I agree, it is not only the guns, but in the U.S. it happens to be, and where we see fewer guns, we see less gun violence. Let's take a break. We have a great program for you today. I'm glad you're with us. We will talk about Megyn Kelly making some Republicans account for their positions on Iraq and so much more. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible by liberalbias.com because good conservatives know that climate change is a myth. So why are there so many graphs and charts that disagree? Find out about the liberal bias inherent in temperature, weather, and other sciencey things at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Mark Peters. Mark, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We depend on our members to keep this show up and running, and members have been responsible for the recent expansion from 4 shows a week to 5 shows a week. So if you see a David Pakman Show member, thank them, but also become a part of the solution to the media problem. Go to davidpakman.com/membership and sign up today. You, of course, can also support our program. If you do any shopping on Amazon.com, if you go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page, that will give us a kickback for any shopping you do on Amazon. The best thing to do is bookmark the link and use it when you shop. We get a list of what our viewers purchase through that link. We don't get any personally identifying information. I like to look through the list. I saw this, Lewis. This is so unusual. There's something called Dominique's U.S. Senate bean soup. And I said, that's a weird name for a soup. It's not exactly Campbell's. So I clicked on it, and it's canned soup that has a picture of the U.S. Senate on it. And I don't know if it's some kind of goof, if this is just like a soup company that has been around and I just don't know what it is or what the connection is to the U.S. Senate. Have you ever heard of this?
I've never heard of it. I can't even imagine what this is all about. I assume it's a goof, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, they were cans of soup. It was a 12-pack that somebody bought. If that was you who purchased it, let me know what that's all about. U.S. Senate bean soup. Amazing. Also, somebody purchased an inversion table. This is one of those things that you strap yourself in and then you flip it so your head is down and your legs are up. What do you use it for? If you're the viewer who used our Amazon link to purchase an inversion table, I know, Lewis, that there are a lot of different kind of like alternative medical treatments that involve inversion tables. And I think there are some actual, what would you call them? Like a chiropractic treatment that also involves being flipped upside down. Have you ever done anything like this?
Other than hanging upside down from tree limbs and things like that. No, but I mean, I think the entire purpose, when you get down to it, is spinal decompression. And I hear it works wonders, David.
What does it work for? In other words, what issues does it help?
It could help. I don't know, lots of different issues, I guess. Some chiropractors will tell you that the spine is I don't know, the spine is the root of a lot of problems for a lot of people.
Right. All right. Well, if you are the viewer who purchased the inversion table and you want to email in, let us know what you're using it for. I mean, I am pretty curious about that. Okay. Every clock that is broken is typically right once or twice a day, more or less. And this is the case with conservative right-wing corporate media. This has happened with Bill O'Reilly. This has happened with Glenn Beck. And now it has happened with Fox News' Megyn Kelly on the subject of Iraq. She did back-to-back interviews one day after another with former Vice President Dick Cheney on the topic of Iraq, and then with former UN Ambassador John Bolton. We're going to go first to a clip of the interview with Dick Cheney. Also, Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, was there. I'm not going to play any clips where she speaks, just in case you were wondering. I assume she did speak during the interview, but that's not what we're going to play today. Today, the focus is when Megyn Kelly focuses in specifically with former Vice President Cheney and talks to him about the fact that he had a role in creating the disastrous situation in Iraq. Let's take a look at the video. Dick Cheney with Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly asking the right questions here.
In your op-ed, you write as follows: rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many. But time and time again, history has proven that you got it wrong as well in Iraq, sir. You said there was no doubt Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. You said we would be greeted as liberators. You said the Iraq insurgency was in the last throes back in 2005. And you said that after our intervention, extremists would have to, quote, rethink their strategy of jihad. Now, with almost $1 trillion spent there, with 4,500 American lives lost there, what do you say to those who say you were so wrong about so much at the expense of so many?
No, I just fundamentally disagree, Megyn. You've got to go back and look at the track record. We inherited a situation where there was no doubt in anybody's mind about the extent of Saddam's involvement in weapons of mass destruction. We had a situation where after 9/11, we were concerned about a follow-on attack that would involve not just airline tickets and box cutters as the weapons, but rather something far deadlier, perhaps even a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, Dick Cheney just keeps trying to criticize President Obama. Did you hear what he actually said? The Bush administration inherited a tough situation. There is nothing funnier than hearing conservatives for year after year of President Obama's presidency say Obama did not inherit anything bad from George W. Bush. Everything is his fault. And now Dick Cheney says that, wait a second, the Bush administration did inherit a pretty bad situation in Iraq where Saddam Hussein was allowed, presumably by Bill Clinton, to do all sorts of bad stuff. Cheney's a funny guy, isn't he?
Cheney is, I wouldn't call him funny, David. I kind of want to kick him in the nuts when I hear this.
Okay, so then the day after the interview with Dick Cheney, Megyn Kelly has on former UN Ambassador John Bolton, and she tries to say, we need to remember, former Ambassador Bolton, that you were involved in what got us into this mess in the first place, and John Bolton doesn't really want to talk about that. Check this out.
Well, I think that's true, but I think, unfortunately, it's irrelevant to the circumstances we face now.
I know you keep saying that, but it is relevant to a lot of people who are out there wondering, how did we get here? Is it not relevant to ask, how did we get here?
Well, it's very interesting, but the decision maker has to look at the environment we have now, and that's why I think it's a mistake at this point for the president to put these 300 advisors in place to help the al-Maliki government. I think that ends up in strengthening Iran's hand in Iraq at a time when Iran is the principal threat that we face. And, I couldn't care less what Obama's poll numbers are. The issue is what we should do to protect American interest.
Okay, you know that a lot of people are out there tonight saying, well, weren't you one of the people who was in favor of going into Iraq in the first place, and is that why you don't want to discuss the past 10 years and whether they were worth it?
I'd be happy to discuss the past 10 years, and we can start 10 years before that if you want, but that's not the question that America faces today.
So this is not the serious grilling that these guys deserve, but the fact that it's Fox News, the fact that it's Megyn Kelly, I have to say this is way better than I would have expected to get. I don't know if you think, Lewis, that it's too little too late or that we should just be glad for whatever we can get, but these were just kind of obvious questions, you know?
I'm glad this is happening on Fox News. Perhaps it will open the eyes of some of those Fox viewers who think that that Cheney and Bush made the right decisions.
If I were John Bolton or Dick Cheney or any of these architects of the Iraq War, I would be thrilled that I was not being prosecuted for war crimes. I would be thrilled that I wasn't in prison. And I would be staying completely out of the limelight. I wouldn't do any of these interviews. And maybe these interviews are coming because Bolton or Cheney or whoever feel the need to try to get out there and push back against the obvious and accurate criticism of their involvement in the Iraq War. But given what they got away with, and the cronyism and the Halliburton and the mercenary contractors, the whole thing, the hundreds of thousands of dead civilians, I would be hiding and I would be saying nothing. I would be talking to no one and I would just be enjoying my freedom.
Right. Unfortunately, they got away with it, but there are a couple countries which Bush and Cheney can't go to. So I guess that's something.
So I think Bush canceled a trip to Switzerland at one point. Cheney and maybe Bush as well decided not to go to Canada, I think, because of the situation. Am I forgetting some others?
As far as I know, I think that's it. I'm pretty sure Cheney cannot go to Switzerland as well.
Speaking of revisionist history around the Iraq War, there are some right-wingers that are so eager to prove that the entire Bush administration did not lie through their teeth about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that they're swallowing a little bit of fear-mongering 100% that has been permeating right-wing and Tea Party blogs over the weekend. So there have been a couple of articles written on right-wing blogs that say, the jihadist group bringing terror to Iraq overran a Saddam Hussein chemical weapons complex last week, gaining access to disused stores of hundreds of tons of potentially deadly poisons, including mustard gas and sarin. ISIS invaded the Al-Mutana mega facility 60 miles north of Baghdad in a rapid takeover that the U.S. government said was a matter of concern. And the Tea Party and right-wing websites are saying George W. Bush has been vindicated. We found the WMDs. So let's go through this piece by piece. Number one, these are not WMDs, certainly not the WMDs that many were claiming were in Iraq. Number two, this facility that has been found now, which supposedly, according to some right-wingers, are the 2003 invasion WMDs, the facility was notorious in the 1980s and 1990s as the locus of Saddam's industrial-scale efforts to develop chemical weapons programs. We knew that this was there the entire time. These are not the WMDs you were looking for. To quote, who is it, Lewis? These are not the droids you're looking for? Harrison Ford?
No, it was Alec Guinness from Star Wars.
Right. Those were not the WMDs we were looking for. This is a long-abandoned location from the 80s and 90s. These were not the WMDs that were supposedly in existence around the 2003 Iraq War. The stuff that ISIS could get their hands on is still potentially dangerous. It is not WMD dangerous. And the right-wing websites, Lewis, their heads are exploding. They're apoplectic. They can't call Alex Jones fast enough to get a report going on this, and just desperate to find something to vindicate the incredibly ill-advised invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Right. Even if there was some mustard gas and sarin in Iraq, I don't think that qualifies as a weapon of mass destruction. So they're really grasping here.
Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Join us on Facebook. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you have a Twitter or Facebook account, donate a retweet or Facebook share to us by going to donateyouraccount.com/David Pakman Show. There's no question at all that the Christian persecution complex is particularly prevalent among American conservatives, but we're actually starting to see it in some other countries as well. Former British MP Anne Widdecombe has claimed that it was easier to be a Nazi or a communist in post-war Britain than it is to be a Christian today in the United Kingdom because, quote, quite militant secularism discourages people from expressing their faith. Now, of course, expressing their faith for these right-wing Christians is often a euphemism for imposing their arbitrary values attributed to so-called sacred texts on everybody else, regardless of whether they have any interest in hearing about it or not. So when we hear, Lewis, about imposing religion and religious freedom, we have to evaluate those terms for what they actually mean in practice.
Right. It's the meaning is never what it sounds like.
Anne Widdecombe claimed that respect for others' personal views meant people could have been a fascist in post-1945 Britain or a communist during the Cold War, but Christians now have started suppressing the expression of conscience. She did an interview with BBC Radio 5's Stephen Nolan. The conservative former politician said that concerns over political correctness mean people are reluctant to express their faith to others because they think strong belief offends them. Yeah, this is just absolutely ridiculous. And she goes on also to say that you can't offer to pray for somebody according to the law. And if it's an even bigger stance on conscience that you're taking, some of the equality laws can actually bring you to the attention of the police themselves. Of course, any laws related to religion in the UK apply to all religions. There is nothing at all specific to Christianity, but somehow Miss Widdecombe thinks that it is a specific attack on her religion that is happening there.
Well, the exact same thing happens here to those people who think that all the religious laws strictly apply to Christianity, right?
Yeah, they're specifically designed simply to attack Christianity. And although here in the U.S., the only religious holidays are Christian ones, the official holidays. In the U.K., official bank holidays for Christmas Day, Good Friday, and Easter Monday, 60% of the United Kingdom is Christian, which is more than 13 times larger than the number 2 religion in the UK, which is Islam, at 4.4%. It really seems, Lewis, like Christianity is being completely and specifically marginalized in the UK, huh?
Yeah, what a disaster, David. It's a violation of human rights.
The Christian persecution complex has reached England. Christians that have been putting Bibles in schools are flipping out after atheists started handing out humanist literature. There's a Kentucky atheist group that fought Revelation with reason in the Casey County School District. When the Gideons group was allowed to distribute Bibles to students, the Tri-State Free Thinkers decided to get a little creative. The ACLU also was saying that this distribution of Bibles is really not a good idea. This could go against the law. The superintendent, Marion Souders, allowed the religious group Gideons International to distribute New Testament Bibles in elementary schools in his district. The local atheist group, Tri-State Free Thinkers, said, okay, we could take legal action, but instead, for now, let's just show up with our own book called Humanism, What's That? A Book for Curious Kids. It is a book directly written for children to say that religious ideas can be questioned. It's okay to question religious ideas. Not really a very heretical idea. I guess to some Christians it is. Superintendent Souders said, okay, they can distribute that literature as well. The religious parents are going absolutely nuts. They're threatening to keep their kids at home if this humanist literature is made available in school. This is actually in many ways better than a lawsuit, although ultimately a lawsuit may be necessary to stop the insanity, because the double standard with which they agree with the distribution of religious literature that happens to be their particular sect. But if it's anything else, if it's any alternative idea, all of a sudden, my kids can't be exposed to that. They need to go home right away.
Right. This has nothing to do with the material being humanist or secular material. Because if it were Qurans being distributed, of course, they'd be just as outraged.
No question. And it's always interesting to me that Muslims, Jews, humanists, they're not proselytizing, right? It's always the groups that seem to be horrified at the injection of any alternative ideas that are the ones that proactively proselytize. There's something interesting there, I think.
It's it's a double standard. It's hypocrisy. It's the height of hypocrisy.
Talk about this with us on Reddit. What are your thoughts? Go to our Reddit subforum, davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Send us your thoughts. I'm very curious to hear what people think about this. Am I missing something? Is this not truly a hypocritical double standard here between the Gideon International group and the Humanist group? We'll take a break. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Jeremy Meeks is a convicted felon, an alleged gang member, and is currently being held in jail on more felony weapons charges. Bail is set at $1 million. And he has also become an internet sensation. He has a Facebook page with 120,000 fans. His mother started a fundraising page that has attracted over 145 donations in one day. And there's a Twitter hashtag, Free Jeremy Meeks, which was trending on Twitter over the weekend. Everything that has happened that is positive related to Jeremy Meeks is related to this handsome, so-called handsome mugshot, which was posted by the Stockton Police Department on Facebook this week. It quickly became a sensation. People saying they're just amazed by his bone structure and his cheekbones, and they just think his eyes are so amazing. And this has led to something that has been identified in many studies as the halo effect. This is the tendency to view others holistically as either all good or all bad. When we first see someone in a good light, maybe with this nice mugshot, we tend to think of them overall as someone who is to be supported and couldn't possibly be guilty of anything. This is why, for example, companies will pay beautiful actresses to promote products over which they have absolutely no expertise. This is pretty interesting, what's going on with this, Lewis, because this, if we look simply at the charges and the criminal background of Jeremy Meeks, without saying anything systemically about the incarceration system, the legal system, and all of that, the only thing that has made this guy popular and get attention is the fact that a bunch of people found his mugshot to be really attractive, but it actually does nothing in practice to distinguish him as an alleged criminal from anyone else. So I think that this is interesting. We know, right, that attractive people are often seen more favorably, but none of this is really a surprise, as disturbing as it is.
No, we had the same thing happen with the Boston Marathon bomber.
Right.
Right. After, of course, there was a lot more media coverage of that. Everyone in the country knew who he was, but he developed this fan base just because a lot of people thought he was good looking.
I want to remind people, though, that handsome people receiving favorable treatment has nothing really to do with the American justice system. It's been shown time and time again biologically that this is expected to happen. The real problem is when rich people are treated favorably by the American justice system, when we hear about affluenza, when we hear about the rich guy with 10 DUIs who still has his license and is just on probation. That, to me, as interesting as this is from a sociological point of view, from the point of view of American justice, the issue of a plutocratic system is far more concerning than this, which can really just be attributed to biology, as many studies show us.
Yeah, I think so. It's unfortunate, David, and a little embarrassing.
The anti-gay group National Organization for Marriage, last year, they held a March for Marriage. It was basically a parade against equality, a parade for homophobia. It failed miserably. Very few people showed up, and it just didn't really go well. A few days ago, they tried this thing again. An estimated 2,000 people convened at the U.S. Capitol for this rally, which culminated in a march to the Supreme Court, apparently to ask for no gay marriage. And as was the case last year, a bunch of supporters were bussed in by State Senator from New York, Ruben Diaz, who, in spite of being a Democrat, is anti-gay. And a lot of these individuals were Spanish-speaking evangelicals from our area here in New York. They didn't really seem to care very much about the actual point of the march. They didn't really know very much about the National Organization for Marriage. They were just bussed in, hanging out in Washington, D.C. Many didn't even speak English. Yet again, complete failure. The larger groups of people you have don't even know what they're there for in many cases. They were bussed in under some other pretense by State Senator Ruben Diaz. What an epic failure once again for the National Organization for Marriage.
It's a total joke. I think these people should really focus their energy and effort on perhaps, I don't know, making people's lives better instead of trying to make them worse.
Well, the entire framing of the thing, Lewis, was that they are pro-marriage. They're not really anti-anything. Of course, there was one rally goer who had a sign that said, anyone who embraces homosexuality does it because they hate God and love to be sinful. There were signs instructing gay people to repent. Another one said, repent or perish. Another sign denounced sodomy and abortion as wrong. Here is a little clip talking to one guy who's there. He, I mean, you know, how can I even really sum this up? Just listen for yourselves.
I mean, marriage is under attack, and I think that homosexual marriage is an oxymoron and an abomination, and it's not even, you know, it's just a aggressive, offensive attack on marriage.
Do you worry about what it's going to mean for the kind of country that your son grows up in, that your grandchildren grow up in, that sort of thing?
Of course, it's unfathomable. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg in such a short time. In 2008, Obama was against it. I mean, this is supernatural.
It's been a very fast transformation. So do you think that, let's just say that gay marriage comes nationwide, what do you see maybe as a consequence of that coming down the road?
Violence?
Violence by gay rights activists, or
the state is saying that my marriage would be equivalent to what homosexuals do and what homosexual relationships are, and that it just can't be tolerated.
I received 5 emails from viewers saying, David, the anti-gay guy who's preaching violence in this video is clearly a gay guy who's closeted. I don't know anything about that, but it's kind of odd that 5 different people who I have no reason to think were colluding or talking to each other in any way seem to think that that's going on. Mike Huckabee went up there. There were very few people left by the time Mike Huckabee made it up on stage, so not that many people heard him say that if Martin Luther King were alive today, he would definitely be against marriage equality. What a disgusting event. And to some extent, I just really feel bad for these people. It's like, what are you doing with your lives? Going to Washington, D.C. to protest people doing something that affects you to 0 degree. I mean, not at all. It's really a waste of time for these people.
You have to assume at some point these were normal people who became indoctrinated, and it's hard to feel bad for them because, I mean, they are now the ones doing the indoctrinating, or at least trying to. You
really have to question your life if you're at a National Organization for Marriage rally. By the way, even though only 2,000 people showed up, we can assume that right-wing media will report that 10 million people rallied at the Capitol against people's right to just be married to the person they love. What a great battle that they're fighting. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here's a voicemail.
Hey, Mr. Packman. This is Nick, the atheist, or I happen to be one anyway. I'm curious how all these anti-Semitic people call your show so often, and they ascribe some nonsensical, made-up, delusional world of a Jewish conspiracy that you and Lewis are a part of. As far as I'm concerned, you guys are secular humanists. You probably shouldn't downplay that as often, and you should probably put these people in their place. You know? Well, thanks for the great show, guys. Always appreciate watching it.
All right, well, interesting comment. Yes, it is always interesting to see the anti-Semitic voicemails that we get and a little commentary on that. Always interested to hear others' point of view on the anti-Semitism hurled towards us on this program. On today's bonus show, a harsh sentence handed down in Canada for a woman who was just trying to rescue some ducks. Also, a high school principal plagiarizes his graduation message, and much more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. We are mostly funded by individual members, and members get a great list of perks, including the commercial-free podcast feed, audio and video of the full commercial-free program, and of course the world-famous bonus show hosted by producer Lewis. We will see you on the bonus show in just a few minutes.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.